Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to discuss backgrounds and borders with CSS. So we've already discussed the color property. Another really common property to adjust is the background property and borders property and the various properties that are similar or related to them. We're also going to touch back on divs and spans that we discussed in the HTML crash course. Let's get started. All right, here I have my basic HTML file and I've linked it to the style sheet master.css, and my master.css is currently blank. Let's add a few elements to our HTML and then we'll style some of their properties in the CSS. We'll begin by just creating a simple paragraph tag, and we'll say this is a paragraph, but I'm also going to add in outside the div. And then let's put in a div tag. So this div tag, notice it's a division. Right now, I'm not going to worry about class. We'll talk about that in an upcoming lecture. Instead, I'm just going to have this division. And I'm going to put in some paragraph tags inside this division. So we'll say I'm inside the div, and let's put in another paragraph tag also inside the div. And finally, we'll put in one more paragraph tag. It'll say inside the div, ... And then we're going to add in a span tag. So get a little bit of space here and then start typing out span, and you should see span, and we're able to autocomplete that. Or you can just type it out manually with the open and closing span tags. So inside of this, we'll say in a span. Okay, so I'm going to save those changes. So I have this paragraph and I have this division, and when I refresh my basics.html, right now my CSS is blank. So I just see this is a paragraph outside the div, I'm inside the div, also inside the div, and then inside the div in a span. So right now the divs and the spans, they're not really showing up as any different than the other paragraphs. Okay, now let's add in some CSS style calls. So we'll come back to master.css, and I'm actually going to apply a style to the entire body. And what I'm going to explore is the background property. So notice as you begin to type background, there's all kinds of properties you can affect, such as the origin, the size, the image, position, color, and so on. I'm just going to call basic background, and here if I provide a color, let's say gray for instance, save this and refresh, anything that's within the body is going to have its background color changed to gray. And you should be careful with this sort of choice because you can make something really awful like red, and then you'll have this bright, ugly red website, but maybe you want it that way, so it's also more power to you. Now, as an option, what you can do is also provide a URL image. So we can say background URL, and I have open here some image from unsplash.com, and you can really point out to any image hosted online. If I just copy this image address of this cute little puppy and paste it here into my actual URL tag, there we go. So we'll say background URL and this really long image, save those changes, and we'll come back here, refresh, and now if you zoom out, you should see this image, and notice how it's actually being repeated. So an option to make that stop is to add in background dash repeat, and then you can say no repeat. And look at this autocomplete that's actually telling us the option, so that's really nice. We can have it repeat along the x-axis or y-axis, or just no repeat. Save that, and when we refresh this page, you only see that picture once. Now, for pretty much all our sites, we're not going to really be having URL backgrounds. I just want to show you that you have that option. Okay, so let me go ahead and comment all this out, and I can comment this out just by highlighting all of this and then doing Control//, or you can just manually add in /* to the beginning and the end of whatever you want to comment out. So I'm going to save that so we won't be affecting the body anymore. And let's refresh this page. There we go. So now we have it nice and clean, white. And let's go back and now discuss these divs and this particular span. So let's imagine that I want to just style a certain portion of my website. Maybe I don't want to style every single paragraph tag. Instead, I only want to style some of the paragraph tags. This is where something like a div can come in real handy. So what I'm going to do is just refer to that div and then change the background of that division. So we'll say background, and notice by default I can just say background blue. I can also say background dash color. It'll treat it the same way. So I'm going to save that, set the background to blue here, refresh, and now everything inside the div is going to have background blue. We can also affect the border. So if you say border and give this a color, such as orange, save that, then I can color this border that's around the div. But notice right now, I'm not seeing any effect, and that's because we haven't specified how thick or how wide we want that border. So I can say border dash width, and then I can say medium, thin, or thick. And then we also have to provide a border style. So we'll say border dash style, and there's dashed, grooves, hidden, dotted. We'll say dotted for now. Save that, refresh, and now I see a dotted orange border around this. And you can play around with these border styles. Solid is another style that's really commonly used. Refresh that, and now you see this solid orange around it. Keep in mind, you can also provide actual pixels here. So maybe you say 20px for pixels if you want to make it really thick, or if you want to just have it be really thin, maybe you just say 2 pixels or something like that. Refresh, and I see this thinner orange. Okay, so the main ideas here is that you can affect the background color. You can also set a URL to your background. You have border, but the border is not going to show up unless you say border width and border style. Now there is a shorthand for this, and often what people will do is instead of saying border, border width, and border style, you can actually combine all of these to just one line by providing it in this order. So you can say border, orange, 2 pix, solid, and let's make it thicker, something like 10 pixels. Let's change the color to red, and let's make it dashed here. So you can provide a single line code like this, and then when we refresh this, you'll see that take effect. So since people like to affect borders without having to write border width and border style, CSS will also accept these kind of 3 terms just linked to border. Okay, so there are your options for editing background and border, and again, notice what's happening. It's only affecting div tags. So just to show you again, let's stylize all the paragraph tags. I can say color and maybe make it really obvious, something like all paragraphs should be yellow. I run this, and now all the paragraphs are yellow, including the ones outside the div. Now let's imagine I want to affect this one that was in the span, in a span. All I need to do is say span, and then we can give it a specific background, such as a red background, and we can change its color to something, maybe black should be pretty obvious. Okay, so now I refresh this page, and I see in a span with a red background in black font color. All right, that's really the basics of what we're going to discuss here. Again, you have these background parameters, these border parameters, and you can run border either border width and border style, or all as a single line. And then we have the ability to tag paragraphs as well as divs and spans. Okay, I hope that clarified why we use divs and spans as well. Coming up next, we're going to talk about selectors, which is probably one of the most important aspects of using CSS, being able to use ID selectors and class selectors. That's really what we're going to be doing most in our real life projects, so it's going to be important to understand that very next lecture. For this lecture, all you need to understand is that you can affect backgrounds and borders, and you can call div and span tags specifically. If you have any questions, feel free to post to the Q&A forums. We'll see you at the next lecture.